Our larger Catechism reading continues our meditation on the 99th question. It is a question with an extended answer. We considered the first two sections of that answer, and this morning we'll consider a couple more. The question reads, what rules are to be observed for the right understanding of the Ten Commandments? The answer is that for the right understanding of the Ten Commandments, these rules are to be observed. Number 3, that one and the same thing in diverse respects is required or forbidden in several commandments. 4, that as where a duty is commanded, the contrary sin is forbidden, and where a sin is forbidden, the contrary duty is commanded. So where a promise is annexed, the contrary threatening is included. And where threatening is annexed, the contrary promise is included. That what God forbids is at no time to be done. What He commands is always our duty. And yet every particular duty is not to be done at all times. We look to the Ten Commandments as a guide for our moral lives. How are we to live before God and His world? They give us a direction for the various decisions that we must make in the course of life. God's law is a light to our path, a lamp to our feet. When we look to that law, we should understand it in a proper way. Last week we saw that God's law is perfect. That is, it is complete. Nothing is to be added. It is not lacking anything. It completely considers the whole moral compass of life and all of our duty and obligation before God and for one another. It's given in summary form, and we go to the rest of the Scriptures to work out our understanding of the Ten Commandments. We also begin to apply that law to the various circumstances of life. And so when we make a deduction from the law to our particular circumstance in life, that too is an application of God's law. We also saw that God's law last week is spiritual, that it addresses the inner nature of our hearts. Both mind, will, and emotions are all under the purview of God's command. God's command does not simply address our outward nature, but it addresses our inner hearts. Here we consider ways in which we examine or develop our understanding of God's law. We do not simply read it on the surface and walk away, but we reflect on it. We try to develop our understanding. And there are a variety of ways in which we can do that, using contraries, so that where the commandment says something in a positive way in this direction, we learn that by reflection, the contrary is therefore forbidden. Or where there's a command that forbids us to do something, then the opposite, the positive, is thereby commanded. So contraries are an important way in which we uncover the meaning and the teachings of the Ten Commandments. The third principle of understanding these Ten Commandments is that one and the same thing is required or forbidden in several commandments. We should look to the commandment as having a point of meaning. What specifically does it say? Thou shalt not commit murder. What does that precisely say? It does not have an equivocal meaning such that it says thou shalt not commit murder, but at the same time it's okay to commit murder. The meaning is one and it's precise. At the same time, while it is one commandment, it has many different respects. It applies to a wide variety of circumstances and considerations. For example, in the command against murder, does it also prohibit capital punishment? Does it prohibit acts of war? Does it prohibit acts of terror? We consider that commandment in a variety of circumstances or situations whereby it applies or doesn't apply, and we need to think through our understanding of that commandment. But the meaning at heart is simple. It is one and the same thing with a variety of applications. God's Word comes to us not only in command, but also in promise and in threat. God tells us what we must do, but He does not leave us with a bare commandment that requires us to observe something. We do not have a God who is uncaring or unfeeling or unsympathetic. He understands that we operate not simply by rules and regulations, but also we need incentives, motivations. We need to have our desires stimulated so that we might do the right thing or be afraid to do the wrong thing. And so God's Word comes to us and gives us commands, but also promises, whereby we are encouraged to trust in the Lord and obey Him, but also threats as well, to warn us against breaking God's law. There are consequences to disobedience. And the promises and the threats open up those consequences to us. When we examine these promises and threats, again, we can use contraries to develop them, to explain or to unravel in greater depth what the nature of God's promise or threat means to us. So the use of contraries is important in developing our understanding of God's Word. The fifth rule and principle is rather straightforward. What God forbids, we're not to do at any time. There's not a circumstance in which God's Word commands us to do something clearly and explicitly, and we're free to just simply disobey it. We are to do what God tells us to do at all times. It's always our duty to obey God, and yet particular duties change from time to time. For example, we're told to pray without ceasing. How many of you are praying at this moment? We are to pray and always have an attitude of prayer, ready to pray at every moment in life. But there are a wide variety of duties that God calls us to. One may be meditating on God's Word, attending public worship, prayer, working for a living, tending to our children. We have a wide variety of commands given to us by God, and we cannot keep them all at one and the same time. But we are obligated to observe all of them. This means that there should be a certain degree of wisdom in applying God's commands to our particular circumstances. When do I attend public worship services? Or when do I stay at home to care for my child? When do I begin my day in prayer and meditation on God's Word? And when do I have to put that aside for other activities? There's a certain measure of discernment that is necessary in understanding what God commands or forbids at this moment, at this time. What should I do now? Right now, our calling is to worship the Lord and give Him our full attention.